it's time for the main event, the reason why you guys came here. Right? Aren't you all excited? I'm pleased to present to all of you one of the most esteemed people here, I think. He's great, he's awesome. I really like his sermons. He's the dean of the International College, which had its name changed, but to the International College of Public and International Affairs. And I feel really bad because I was part of it. I'm part of it. So, please, everyone give a warm round of applause for Elmore.
Good morning to everyone. Good to see everybody this morning. First of all, I wasn't supposed to be here today. My wife was supposed to be here. And I guess the Reverend Greenwood contacted me about 2 months ago and said, would you like to give a sermon in September? And what I said was, how about my wife giving a sermon in September? He said, hey, that's a great idea. And then last week my wife got called to Las Vegas. And so I'm here, sorry. And well, what do you think about my tie? Actually, Father picked this tie for me 25 years ago. There was an event at East Garden, and there were a number of us there. And on the way out, he gave each of us a tie. And when he gave this to me, I thought, what did I do wrong now? But actually, what I found was that with a certain suit that I had, it was perfect. And I was just amazed. Like, gee, it's perfect. So this jacket is close to that suit, but I'm too big for that suit anymore. But, anyway, Father asked me when I speak. Actually, Mother asked me when I speak, particularly in this type of occasion, always to wear one of the ties that your parents gave me. And so sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't, and when I don't, I have to tie in here usually, because some of them are not too beautiful. But at any rate, happy to be here. When you prepare a sermon, I want to say, usually there's two parts to a sermon. The one part of the sermon is, I would say, the cognitive dimension or the academic dimension of your presentation. The other side of it is the affective side, the emotional side. And really, to prepare a sermon well, it takes many, many hours. Tens of hours. So I think I'm pretty confident about the academic dimension of my presentation. I'm less confident about what's going to come out affectively in this presentation, emotionally what's going to come out in this presentation. So let me start by saying something about John the Baptist, because I may get very upset with John the Baptist in the middle of this presentation at some point. Poor John the Baptist. I mean, this was a guy who tried to live a faithful life. He tried to be responsible, but he messed up. Although he did so many good things in his life, he messed up. And when the time approached for the second coming, I feel that probably God came to John and said, do you want to get to heaven a little faster? If you do, you're going to be the battering ram for the next 100 years. Everything is going to focus on how you failed and why you failed. But hold tight accept your responsibility, and if you get through this, finally you'll be happy, and finally you'll be reconciled with me, reconciled with Jesus, and able to go forward. So I hope that you can keep that in mind. I hope that I can keep that in mind also as I do this presentation today. So, another look at John the Baptist. This is a picture of Zechariah and the angel Gabriel appearing to him, telling him about the birth of John the Baptist and John the Baptist's important role. And these are the names of some of the key figures that preceded John the Baptist. Just towering figures who, in Western culture, Socrates, Chinese culture, Confucius, Partho-Indian culture, Buddha, and all the prophets of Israel. And each of them were remarkable people. Anybody in here read Socrates' Apology? Yeah, if you take, a few of us have, if you take the time to read it, you'll be moved to tears. How convicted he was to stand up for the law, the rule of law, for what was right. And Confucius is so contemplative on what it meant to be a good person, and feeling that he himself was not a good person, constantly checking himself. And Buddha, basically, again, a person who abandoned all of the luxuries and the wealth in order to find enlightenment, to come beyond the realities that surrounded him that for him were too superficial. These figures played such key roles in the preparation of the groundwork for the coming of Jesus. And it was a remarkable groundwork that was prepared for Jesus. Socrates had an influence through Virgil, the poet Virgil, upon Augustus Caesar. Augustus Caesar, who was, basically the Roman emperor at the time of Jesus' birth. And Augustus Caesar wanted to transform the Roman Empire. Do you know what he wanted to make the focus of that empire? The traditional family, husband and wife. He wanted that to be the focus of Rome. And Virgil was all over the place. He was good, he was bad. But he did write an eclogue which talked about the coming of a Messiah. And some people interpret it as a reference to the coming of Jesus. And also, he emphasized the Socratic notion that what one does in this life has an impact upon what's going to happen in the next life. Right beside the Roman Empire, this was working before that. Right beside, not the Roman Empire, in Israel you have the Indo-Parthian Empire, and it had very close ties with China. It served as a connecting point with China. And it was from that empire that the works of Buddha were translated and brought into China. And amazingly, in the Parthian Empire, one of the most common languages that was spoken was Aramaic, along with Greek. So there was a terrain of preparation, a way in which Jesus could be welcomed, if you will. And there was likewise the Han Empire of Jesus' time, which existed almost exactly at the same time as the Indo-Parthian Empire, from 2006 to BC to 220 AD. And there were a lot of ties, we know, between Rome and the Han Empire. So there was preparation. There was a sophisticated way of travel from one part to the other of the Roman Empire. And also there was a vast array of trade routes that connected the entire known world during this period of time. So things were ready for something that night. And in the midst of all that appears John the Baptist. John the Baptist was from a very prominent family, a very unique lineage, which we'll talk about in a minute. He was dealt with respectfully by the Sadducees, which were influenced by Greek thought, who were influenced by the Roman Empire. who had a more liberal approach to religion, who doubted the notion of resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees, who were probably a lot more acceptable to us than the image that we often have in traditional Christianity. They were a group that wanted to see eventually an independent Israel. They thought that following the law was an important thing to do. They lived in a strict way trying to do that. The scribes, who were particularly dedicated to the scriptures. The Ebionites, who were basically the common people within Israel, who had a particular affection for John the Baptist. We know that John intimidated Herod Antipas, who was the tetrarch, or the king, if you will, of Judea, and had been appointed there by Rome. So this was a person of vast influence. And Jesus maintained, as we know, that John the Baptist was the Elijah who was supposed to precede the Messiah. Elijah was a 9th century BC prophet who attempted to turn, after the kingdom of Israel had been divided into Israel north and Judah south. He tried to turn the northern kingdom back to belief in God. They were worshiping two false gods, a male god Baal and a female god Asherah. And those of you who know the story, he challenged those followers of those gods and said, if your God is a true God, if your gods are true gods, then let's see whether the God of my God, the God of Jehovah, or your God can be able to ignite an offering table that each of us will prepare. And we know that it's Elijah who prevails. He destroyed the prophets of Baal and Asherah, and he renewed the northern kingdom of Israel for a certain period of time. But just a little bit over a century later, we know that the Assyrians deported the Jews, and they did so in 3 different groups, and that was culminated in 720 BC. And we know that Elijah was said to have been taken up on a chariot of fire, as we saw in the previous PowerPoint slide. You see it again here. Malachi 4, 5, 6. It was a significant prophecy, and certainly those Jews who were anticipating the coming of the Messiah, they were aware of that prophecy, and they anticipated that before the Messiah came, he would be preceded by Elijah. Within the Jewish faith, even still now, at the time of Passover, there's a feast called Seder, you know. And at the feast of Seder, people prepare a cup for the coming of Elijah, because there was that anticipation that somehow Elijah was going to come. But there were a number of obstacles that made it very difficult for John the Baptist to understand his mission as being the one chosen to follow in Elijah's footsteps. John, as I said, had special parents and a special lineage. Luke 1:5 says, in the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of the Abijah. His wife, Elizabeth, was also a descendant of Aaron. Abijah is from the Aaronic line, and also Elizabeth is from the Aaronic line. There's something special about the Aaronic line, because normally, in order to be Jewish, you must be born of a Jewish mother, correct?
Yes.
But if your father is from the Aaronic line, you are also automatically a Jew. Both sides of his family came from the priestly class, from the Aaronic class. And we know that Gabriel visited Zechariah and made a prophecy concerning his son John. He told him that he had the mission of Elijah. He said he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So he was forewarned about his son. And also Elizabeth, when she saw Mary for the first time, she right away understood who it was that Mary was to be the mother of. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child that you will bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? And hear this. As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. That was John. And yet, when John the Baptist met Jesus at the River Jordan, he testified to Jesus, and he said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. This is the one I meant when I said, a man who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me." But look what John also said. I myself did not know him. And again, I myself did not know him. Did not know him? His father and mother were both told that John the Baptist was to prepare the way for this cousin of his, Jesus. Zechariah and Mary. Due to Zechariah and Elizabeth distancing themselves from Jesus, it was probably hard for Jesus' parents to understand Jesus' mission. This was the smart side of the family. This was the elite side of the family. And they had this moment of revelation, and then somehow things changed, because John said he didn't even know who Jesus was. Jesus, at the age of 12, was with the doctors of the law. How could he end up as a carpenter? In a recent PBS program on Jesus' social class, it talks about Jesus and mentions that the term in Greek is tekton in Mark's Gospel. Artisan would maybe be our best translation. But in the pecking order of a peasant society, a peasant artisan is lower than a peasant farmer. Harold Attridge of Yale Divinity says, we know in general he was low class by the standards of the Roman imperial aristocracy, or even of the ruling class of Palestine, the Herodian kings. So somehow this family that had influence, talking about Zechariah and Elizabeth, and who had an influential son, they didn't take care of him. They didn't take care of Jesus. Before encountering Jesus, John the Baptist denied his mission of Elijah that his parents had been informed of by heaven. Malachi 4:5-6 says that this Elijah figure would turn the hearts of the parents to their children, lest I come and strike the land with total destruction. Zechariah was told, basically paraphrased, the expression that was found in Malachi concerning the mission of Elijah, and that he would turn the hearts of the parents to their children to make a people ready, prepared for the Lord. Did he do so? No. What was going to happen if Elijah did not fulfill his mission? John the Baptist said, I'm not Elijah. And he said he wasn't the prophet. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. In 70 AD, Rome was leveled. That would have been about the time when probably Jesus could have stood still. Totally destroyed. September 8th, 70 AD, Jerusalem was leveled. And John the Baptist himself heralded Jesus, but he did not follow him. He gave testimony to Jesus. But just 2 chapters further in John, we read that Jesus and his disciples were in the midst of baptizing at Enon near Salim. And John's disciples were there too. 2 different constituencies involved in 2 different activities. They didn't come together. He did not encourage his disciples to follow Jesus. At the beginning, when he said the second day on seeing Jesus for a second time, he said, "Behold the Lamb of God," for a second time. And 2 of John's disciples then proceeded to follow Jesus because they recognized he was the Messiah. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, who was one of the 2 who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus, the first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon, Peter, of course, and tell him, "We have found the Messiah, that is the Christ," and he brought him to Jesus. John's disciples were ready. They knew what they were looking for. And when they heard John even just utter those words, they followed him. But we find that somehow John's disciples find all kinds of obstacles when they look at Jesus' disciples. And we see that what John's disciples say has an influence upon the Pharisees. An argument developed between some of John's disciples and a certain Jew over the matter of ceremonial washing. The disciples of John came to him, meaning Jesus, asking, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And then the Pharisees came to Jesus and said almost the same thing. John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking. And they also make a fuss about the washing rituals. "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." So all of these things got passed on. There were rumors, there were words that were getting out. And John's disciples stayed with him. John the Baptist and his followers created a confusion that remains even until today in Christianity, and more clearly in the Mandean sect. Anybody know what the Mandean sect is? Just 70,000 of them had to flee from Iraq. Anybody know about what I'm talking about? The Mandean sect is a group of some 70,000 individuals who follow a particular faith, and in that faith, a key messianic figure is John the Baptist, still today. This is a picture of the Mandean. A lot of their rituals relate around baptism, going to the rivers, and baptizing in the rivers. John the Baptist is referred to in their scriptures as Yahya. Yeshua is Jesus, of course. And this is a passage I thought I'd share with you today. Thereon Yahya, meaning John, answered Yeshua, Messiah in Jerusalem. "Thou hast lied to the Jews and deceived the priests. Thou hast cut off their seed from the men, and from women bearing and being pregnant. The Sabbath which Moses made binding hast thou relaxed in Jerusalem. Thou hast lied unto them with horns, and spread abroad disgrace with the shofar," which is, as you know, a special Jewish horn. What's going on? What actually happened? But many remain oblivious to John's grave failures. They read the scriptures without understanding. Anybody familiar with Bill O'Reilly? Bill O'Reilly always says he's looking out for you. Well, in this area, he's not looking out for you. In his book, Killing Jesus, pages 2 and 3, O'Reilly says, "Martin Dugard and I are both Roman Catholics who were educated in religious schools. But we are also historical investigators and are interested primarily in telling the truth about important people, not converting anyone to a spiritual cause. We brought this dedication and discipline to Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. They wrote a book called Killing Lincoln, another called Killing Kennedy. And in these pages, we will do the same with Jesus of Nazareth." But does he actually do it? Look at his view and the way he presents John the Baptist. By the way, anybody read this besides me? I know Reverend Breland. Were you inspired? Page 148, 149. John finds himself in prison. O'Reilly describes that time in this way. The months in isolation have given John time to reflect on his ministry. He is still a young man, not yet 40. His life's work has been to tell people about the coming of a Messiah, and now he wonders if it is all in vain. And John sends his disciples to Jesus one more time because he wants to find out whether Jesus is the Messiah. O'Reilly describes it this way. Perhaps Jesus is just another great teacher or another man like him, intent on preaching about the coming of God. Still, John is not sure. He has seen firsthand what happens when common people become enthralled with charismatic spiritual men. So John sends his disciples on their way to ask Jesus. And John and Jesus' disciples have their encounter. You're all familiar with that encounter, but let's look at the way in which it's described by Bill O'Reilly. Weeks pass. His disciples have returned, bringing with them some very specific words from Jesus. Quote, he told us to go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. Blessed is the man who does not fall away on account of me. And to that we learn John is relieved. This is the affirmation that he was hoping to hear. Now he can finally find some peace as he languishes in prison. Jesus is once again claiming that he is the one who John publicly proclaimed him to be. Why should John feel relieved? What changed in Jesus' behavior at the time of the encounter with John's disciples to justify Mr. O'Reilly's assertion that Jesus is once again claiming that he is the one who John publicly proclaimed him to be? What changed? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, I don't blame Mr. O'Reilly. Mr. O'Reilly is a good Catholic, and therefore he sees the world through Catholic eyes, and he can't look at these other critical things. But then he goes another step. He says, but there's more. Jesus also extended a warm compliment to John as a reminder to stand strong. I tell you the truth. Among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. And to that I would say to Mr. O'Reilly, but there's more. Because Jesus said, yet he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Somehow Mr. O'Reilly lets that part out of his narrative. What does it mean to be least in the kingdom of heaven? Matthew 5:19 says, so if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. John the Baptist is not called least in the kingdom of heaven. Instead, what Jesus says is, he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than John. It's very clear. Jesus paid a warm compliment to John. Read Matthew 11, 7 to 15. A warm compliment? Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. What did you go out in the desert to see? A reed swayed by the wind? He is the Messiah. He's not the Messiah. He is the Messiah. He's not the Messiah. He who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. There was no warm compliment. That didn't happen. As a matter of fact, just before Jesus met with John's disciples, he lamented The harvest is great and the laborers are few. He didn't have followers. He didn't have people to help him with his work. Mr. O'Reilly says that John is relieved. If he was so relieved, then why didn't he tell his disciples to help Jesus? Even after they reported what Jesus said. Jesus lacked laborers to share the good news. And even if they didn't follow Jesus in John's life, why didn't he say, if something happens to me, then please follow Jesus? He didn't do it. He didn't do it. And so, whatever master plan might potentially have been in place to accelerate the coming of a godly world, it did not happen. All the highways that were built, all the connections that were made. And yet one person who got it about Jesus after Jesus had already passed. Paul. Look at the incredible things that he did in his lifetime. In a short span of maybe 10 or 15 years. Look at the amazing things that he did during that span of time. It would have been, John the Baptist was not Paul. I'm not suggesting that he was Paul. He was a classical, educated Jew. But Judeans could have connected to John the Baptist, and among them there could have been people like Paul who would have also connected, and in that way they could have reached out to the entire world. And therefore, through John's leadership, eventually Jesus could have been recognized, and the kingdom of God could have become a substantial reality. John was such a powerful person. He could stand up to Herod, and Herod was intimidated. He was a very bold person. Think about that. If he hadn't had this obstacle of being blocked by the idea of Jesus possibly being the Messiah, what could he not have done? He was willing to die over some stupid marriage. What could he have done if he had actually been connected to Jesus? Nothing could have stopped him. For those of you who haven't had a chance, I'd like to really encourage you when you do have time on Vimeo, there's an amazing lecture on Jesus' life by Kevin McCarthy. And in that, there's a section where he talks about Jesus preaching in Nazareth and in Capernaum. And in Nazareth, when he came to Nazareth, it says that he was handed the scroll and asked to read the scroll in the synagogue. And he unrolled the scroll, and he found this passage within the scroll. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed upon him. Then he began to say to them, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is not this Joseph's son?" Anybody know where that passage is from? Isaiah 61. Prophecies of glory. Not Isaiah 53, the prophecies of suffering. Jesus read from the prophecies of glory, and he said, on this day, this prophecy was fulfilled. But instead, we know that things went a very different way. We know that Jesus had to start from nowhere and endure the temptations in the desert, spend a life of solitude, do miracles that he had to pray and fast for, be scorned by the Pharisees, scorned by the Sadducees, be tried before Herod, be abandoned by his apostles, and die alone at Golgotha. Why? Because of the failure of John. If John had recognized Jesus, had followed Jesus, had testified to Jesus, had used all the talents that he had to fulfill God's will, then Jesus would have been accepted in that period of time. Because John the Baptist lost faith, but Jesus kept faith, God could give him a man like Saul of Tarsus. And Saul of Tarsus could rally Asia Minor and rally the Roman Empire. And eventually, through that effort, the spiritual kingdom of God could be established in that time. Today, where do we stand? Today, Christianity faces many dead ends. Look at what's happened to marriage and family. Who would imagine that things could change as drastically as they did in just a decade or so? Look at the stuff that we hear about infanticidal abortion, bringing babies out, keeping them alive so you can remove their brains and sell them. No. Who could imagine the rise of the kind of distorted militant Islamism that we find today? The execution of Christians, the destruction of historical sites that will never be seen again, destroyed. You know, I had a chance a few years back to visit Petra in Jordan. So beautiful, so fantastic, so unimaginable to see the work that was done thousands of years ago. And then to think that today those kinds of sites are threatened by people just coming with hammers and bulldozers and pushing them down like someone pushed down Shine Hall. And they're gone forever. You can't get them back, you know. The plummeting role of God in American life. Anybody want to bet that 30 years from now we'll still have "In God We Trust" on our mind? Anybody confident about that? The collapse of social conservatism. What? Because social conservatism, there were conservatives and there were social conservatives. Hey, where are the social conservatives now? They're gone. They're gone. The only thing people talk about on the radio is about taxes. If you lower the taxes, then something, you know, what the heck is going on? That's not what that was. That's not what America was founded upon. There were certain kinds of moral values that were the foundation of America. They're gone. But today, much of the disdain for our movement has passed. And True Mother, who now leads our movement, she has not suffered the media attacks and the misrepresentation that Father did, so people can be more open to her. That's an opportunity. And then she can tell them about Father. That's a wonderful thing. Our movement has matured and is more easily accepted. We have a critical mass, a new generation of educated second and third generation of men and women who can represent True Mother in a way that the first generation could not. So this is a unique time. Those of you who were around 1972, 73, 74, Father said that those 3 years were the most important years in American history. I didn't understand that as we went through those years, but afterwards, when I look back, I recognize in so many ways that that was true. Vietnam would fall, morale would fall, cynicism would emerge, and those things have not been eradicated really. But I think it's very safe to say that 2013 to 2020 is the most important time in human history. This is a time, we heard Mother speak this morning. She has very big ambitions, and those aren't hers. She's being pushed by True Father. She's being pushed by God in terms of things to accomplish. And so in today's Providence, who is John the Baptist? Who is John the Baptist today? I would say that today's John the Baptist is the FFWPU community. All of us. We've been around for a long time. We've gone through many, many storms, weathered many difficulties. We've had much more training than John the Baptist. And we have an important role in terms of steadying the ship. We can guide humanity, True Mother, and to the building of Chandrapur. If you all know this slide. Jesus was not easily accepted because he came from a humble family, because he was not ascetic, because he made startling proclamations, because he had lower class associates, and because he was denounced by Jewish leaders. True Mother comes from a humble family. She had no father. For all practical purposes, our knowledge of True Mother, she's not viewed as being an ascetic. True Mother's made some startling proclamations. Jesus said he'd tear down the temple in 3 days. Mother ordered a re-editing of the Cheongsam. She asked that it be done. Mother said that her spiritual training, and this is backed actually by Father's words, had to be done by herself. Much of her work had to be done by herself. Mother has some controversial associates. People talk about scandals in different places. Cheongsam scandal, whatever people want to talk about. But Mother has held fast. And Mother has been denounced by some prominent Korean and Japanese leaders whom I love, whom you love, and whom I'll always love. But that's the reality of the situation. And members' faith is being shaken in the same way that the disciples of John would be shaken. But we have to be bulwarks today. To succeed, the unification community must stand strong and do so together. We have to do that. That way we can build Chandrapur. To conclude, the mission and failure of John the Baptist is one of the key ways that people can understand true parents' mission. Some of you might remember there was a Pentecostal minister by the name of Don Sills. He was very conservative, a literalist in terms of the Bible. But he spent time with our movement. And as he spent more time with our movement, what he said was, I'm sure of two things. One thing, I'm 100% sure that John the Baptist failed his mission. And number two, I'm sure that the fall was a sexual act. Nothing to do with the fruit. Secondly, as our movement grows and renews itself, we must become faithful and devoted like Paul and not go the way of John the Baptist. Third, let us become faithful John the Baptist and uphold True Mother in advancing towards 2020. Thank you very much. Would you join me in prayer, please? Our loving parent, we are grateful to come before you on this morning and share this time together as a community. Heavenly Parent, we have so many brothers and sisters in this room who are faithful brothers and sisters. We know that Jesus didn't even have one brother or sister like this as a follower in his time. And yet he carried the most precious message. And John the Baptist, who was a bulwark, who was unchanging in his position and in his acts, somehow our parent, he did not catch the moment. And now, in this time in which we live, our parent, we must become faithful. We must show the way. Yes, there are a variety of situations in our movement, but the reality is that we have again reached the time that Jesus spoke about, where the harvest is great and the laborers are few. Let us become those first laborers, Heavenly Father, to build this blessing community and to bring about the liberation of God, the liberation of true parents, and the liberation of humankind. Please, our loving parent, guide us as we begin a new week. Help us, our parent, each and every one of us, to find our path, our direction to the completion of tribal messiahship, our direction to be able to provide comfort and hope to our true mother, to our true father, to the true family, and to all of humankind. We thank you for this chance to come before you, our loving parent. And loving parent, I want to report all these things and offer this time now, upholding the name of true parents, in the name of Thomas and Alexa Ward of the Ward West Central family. Adieu. Adieu.